The sun rose over Kudugu like a tired eye opening after a restless night, casting long golden shadows across the dusty streets. President Ibrahim Traoré's motorcade sliced through the morning haze, a black river of polished jeeps and flashing motorcycles, moving with the kind of speed and precision that said power had arrived. Along the roads, people gathered, waving, cheering, hopeful. For many, it was a chance to glimpse a leader they believed in, a man promising a better future. To the crowds, this was a celebration. But to Ibrahim, it was something else entirely. Sitting in the lead car, his eyes weren't drawn to the flags or the smiling faces. No, his gaze moved like a hunter's, searching, reading, seeing what others chose to ignore. Just before they reached the main junction, something, or someone, broke the pattern. There, standing alone on the roadside, was a small boy, maybe 8 years old. He didn't wave. He didn't smile, his bare feet pressed against the rough ground, his clothes hanging off his thin frame like old rags. And in his tiny hands, he clutched something, an old pair of army boots, worn down to almost nothing. Ibrahim's heart tightened without warning. His silent alarm. A whisper only he seemed to hear. Without hesitation, he leaned forward. "Stop the car!" he commanded. The convoy screeched to a halt, tires grinding against dirt, raising a storm of dust. Confusion rippled through the guards as they scanned for threats, unsure why their president was abandoning protocol. But Ibrahim was already stepping into the dust, walking straight toward the boy. Time seemed to slow. Conversations stopped, cameras lowered. All eyes followed this unlikely crossing of worlds. Dust swirled between them, hanging in the air like the breath of forgotten ghosts. Ibrahim knelt down in front of the boy. Up close he could see the bruises on his legs, the cracks in his tiny feet. He spoke softly, like a father might to his own son. "What's your name, son?" At first, the boy said nothing. His eyes, dark and glassy, stayed locked on the battered boots. Then, a whisper, almost too soft to catch. "My name is Malik." His voice trembled. "These were my father's. He died. In the East. He was a soldier." Ibrahim felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. 1,000 reports, meetings, speeches, all meaningless compared to the truth standing before him now. "And where is your mother?" Ibrahim asked gently. Malik's eyes flickered with pain. "She's sick. We haven't eaten since yesterday." He hesitated, then added, almost ashamed, "I tried to sell these boots, but nobody wants them." The president's throat tightened. Around them, the crowd stood in stunned silence, watching a moment they knew would be etched into memory. Malik clutched the boots tighter. "I didn't want to sell them," he choked out. "But my sister, she's hungry." Carefully, Ibrahim reached out and took the boots from Malik's small hands. They were more than old shoes. They were a father's sacrifice, a son's desperate hope, a family's last relic of dignity. The boots were battered, but once they had marched proudly across battlefields. Once they had meant something. Ibrahim cradled them like treasure. He looked Malik straight in the eye. "Your father was a hero," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "And I promise you this. You will never have to sell his boots again." Malik blinked up at him, confused. "Who are you?" he asked, the innocence in his voice stabbing deeper than any accusation. Ibrahim gave a sad, almost tired smile. "I'm someone who owes your father a great debt." Without waiting, he turned to his team. His voice now was the voice of command. "Find this boy's mother today, and every family in this area who lost someone in the army. I want a full list. Now." Gently, he picked up Malik and carried him to the lead car, placing him in the seat. Beside him, the convoy moved forward again, slower this time, carrying not just a leader but a child, and with him, the heavy weight of a broken promise that was finally ready to be made whole. And somewhere in the crowd, barely louder than "The breeze!" an old man whispered, almost to himself, Maybe this is the leader we've been waiting for." The heavy doors of the presidential office swung closed behind him with a soft thud, cutting out the noise of the world beyond. Ibrahim Traoré moved across the wide, polished floor, his boots clicking with each deliberate step. But it wasn't the grandeur of the room that commanded his attention. It was the small, battered pair of army boots placed carefully on the center of his desk, as if they alone ruled the space now. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and stood staring down at them. The leather was cracked, faded almost to grey. The soles were worn thin, holes letting the memory of every battlefield seep through. These weren't just old boots. They were a father's final footsteps. A silent cry from a life that had marched, fought and fallen without the world even pausing to notice. They were the weight of sacrifice and the shame of broken promises. Ibrahim reached out, running a hand gently over the worn surface, feeling the grit embedded in the seams. His throat tightened. These boots should have been in a museum, honored, behind glass, with stories told in classrooms about the men who wore them. Instead, they had been offered for sale in the dust by a hungry boy trying to save his sister. The thought hit him like a blow to the chest. Something deep inside him stirred, a cold, growing fury. He turned sharply and pressed a button on his desk. Within minutes, the highest ministers of the Defense, Social Welfare, and Veterans Affairs were summoned to an emergency night meeting. No warnings, no time to prepare. One by one, they filed in, still buttoning jackets and smoothing ties, eyes darting nervously when they saw the boots sitting on the desk like silent judges. Ibrahim didn't sit. He stood, holding the boots in both hands, and when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. "I met a boy today," he began. "He had nothing. His father died fighting for this country. His mother is sick. They haven't eaten since yesterday. They tried to sell these boots to survive." He lifted them higher, making sure every man at the table could see. "These boots," he said slowly, "should be a national treasure. Instead, they were treated like trash because we failed them." The room was silent. A few ministers shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. "Sir," the man said, glancing at his papers, "according to our files, the family received full compensation after the soldier's death. It was processed months ago." Ibrahim's eyes, dark and sharp as glass, locked onto him. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice still level but carrying an edge that cut deeper than any shout. "Yes, sir," the official said, though the words trembled. For a moment, Ibrahim said nothing. He simply stared at them all, stared as if weighing their souls against the boots in his hands. Then he spoke, quieter still, but with a force that made the walls seem to lean in. "Then let's go see," he said. "Tonight." Before anyone could protest, he turned and strode from the room, boots still clutched tightly. His convoy was already waiting outside, engines rumbling like restless animals. Without fanfare, without cameras, without speeches, Ibrahim Traoré climbed into the lead car and the fleet rolled into the darkness. The streets were nearly empty now, save for the occasional flicker of a lantern in a window or the distant bark of a stray dog. As the convoy sped through Kudugu's sleeping heart, Ibrahim sat silently, staring out into the night, the battered boots resting on his lap like a vow he refused to break. Tonight he wasn't just the president. Tonight, he was a man answering a debt, and a nation about to be held accountable, and somewhere ahead, in a tiny clay house with a broken roof, the truth waited, shivering in the dark. The convoy rolled to a stop in front of a tiny clay house, nearly swallowed by the darkness. The headlights cut across cracked walls, holes yawning in the roof like open wounds. A thin trail of smoke drifted from what looked like a dying fire. Dimly, there were no security lights here, no armed guards, no comforts of the capital. Only the raw, unfiltered reality of a family abandoned by the promises made in their name. Ibrahim stepped out of the car into the cool night air. He didn't hesitate. He moved straight toward the door, boots crunching softly over the dirt. His guards lingered behind, unsure whether to follow. The door creaked open before he could knock. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a small, flickering oil lamp. On a thin mat lay Mariam, Malik's mother, coughing weakly, her face pale and sunken. Across the room, a small girl, no more than 5, slept curled beside an empty cooking pot, the kind that once boiled with hope, but now sat hollow. Mariam struggled to sit up when she recognized him, panic flashing in her eyes. A president standing in the ruins of her home felt impossible. Ibrahim raised a hand gently, wordlessly asking her to stay still. "You shouldn't have to expect me," he said softly. "I came because something is wrong." He knelt beside her, lowering himself until their eyes were level. His voice stayed low, intimate, full of quiet respect. "Tell me," he asked, "after your husband died, did anyone from the army bring you help? Support?" Mariam shook her head slowly, her thin fingers clutching at the fabric of her dress like a lifeline. "They said money was coming," she whispered, "but it never came." Ibrahim closed his eyes for a moment, a storm building behind his calm exterior. When he opened them again, they burned with something colder, harder. A silent vow took shape inside him. This will not stand. By dawn, the investigation had begun. In the early light, teams of auditors, prosecutors, and trusted investigators were dispatched across ministries. Documents were pulled from filing cabinets, ledgers seized, passwords demanded. What unfolded was a fast, brutal montage of ugly truths peeling away like rotted skin. There it was, clear as blood on paper. Payments that should have gone directly to the families of fallen soldiers had been siphoned off, names forged, signatures faked. Fake accounts created with quiet bribes and smiling lies. Officers in pressed uniforms had built invisible empires off the backs of grieving widows and fatherless children. And it wasn't just Malik's family. Over 100 families had been robbed, abandoned by the system their fathers had died protecting. For 2 years, no one noticed. Or worse, no one wanted to notice. The next evening, the nation tuned in to a live broadcast. Expecting the usual speeches, they found something very different. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone at a podium. No flashy banners, no applause. Just him, the worn boots placed in front of him like witnesses to the crime. He held them up for all to see, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I cannot stand before you tonight," he said, "and pretend everything is fine." He set the boots down with a heavy slam that echoed through every living room, every shop, every crowded cafe. "We lost brave men on the battlefield," he said, his voice rising. "And then we betrayed their families in peace." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the country. "I have ordered the immediate arrest of all those responsible," Ibrahim continued, steel in his tone. "There will be no more middlemen. No more fake documents, no more excuses." Mass firings were announced. Several senior officers were jailed. New reforms were signed into law, effective immediately. From now on, all veteran family support payments would be made directly to the families through a secured, transparent system. Every department head signed a declaration holding themselves personally accountable. And then Ibrahim said the words that would echo through history. "We are not just changing policies, we are changing hearts." Across Kudugu, across the country, families listened. Some in tears, some in stunned silence. In a small clay house, with a patched roof, Mariam wept quietly, hope cracking through the walls of despair. Malik sat close beside her, clutching the boots, not out of fear anymore, but out of fierce pride. Their family wasn't alone anymore. They had been seen, heard, respected. But in the deep corners of his mind, Ibrahim knew this was just the beginning. The rot ran deeper than one case, deeper than one speech. It was woven into the fabric of a forgotten system. And if he wanted real change, he would have to go even deeper, into darker places. Places where the cost of justice would be even higher. And as the convoy rumbled once again through the night, President Ibrahim Traoré stared out into the unknown ahead. The battered boots resting silently beside him, a constant reminder of the road still left to walk. The morning after the televised address, a new kind of movement rippled through the country. Quieter than a parade, stronger than any speech. It started in places like Kudugu, where people who had given up hope now found themselves seen. Mariam, frail and trembling, was transported to Ouagadougou not to be tucked away in some overcrowded, forgotten clinic, but admitted into a real hospital, a clean room, real doctors, nurses who spoke to her with dignity, not pity. For the first time in months, she slept without coughing through the night. Malik and his little sister Aicha were fitted for their first real uniforms, stiff, new clothes, crisp with possibility, and enrolled in a brand new school built, under a fresh initiative, President Ibrahim named the Children of Heroes program. Every brick of the school stood as a silent apology, a promise that no child left behind by war would ever be forgotten again. Yet, for all the newness surrounding him, Malik still treasured one old thing most, his father's boots. Every evening after school, after polishing his own black school shoes, he would gently clean the battered boots and place them beside his bed like sacred relics. One afternoon, as his teacher asked him about them, Malik simply smiled and said, "I'll wear them when I'm big enough, not to fight, but to serve." Across the palace, Ibrahim worked with the intensity of a man on borrowed time. Reforms weren't just penned, they were lived. He didn't rely on reports and official statements anymore. He demanded direct testimonies from those who had suffered. Widows, orphans, wounded soldiers, all were summoned, not to plead for charity, but to tell the truths too long buried under polished speeches. One day, during a special cabinet session, a 10-year-old orphan girl stood alone before a room full of the country's most powerful men and women. Her voice was small, but sharp as a blade. "Why did my dad die for this country?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. "If you forgot us the day after his funeral." The room froze. Ministers who once commanded armies and budgets shifted in their chairs, their faces pale. No one answered. No one dared, until Ibrahim stepped forward, placing a steady hand on the girl's shoulder. His voice carried not just across the room, but across a nation desperate for truth. "That's a question we must all answer," he said, each word falling like a stone. "And if you cannot answer it, you have no place in this government." True to his word, change followed. A national memorial fund was created, but unlike anything before. It wasn't run by politicians or military elites. It was overseen by a board made up of widows, veterans, and orphaned children, ensuring that those who knew the cost of sacrifice were the ones deciding how honor was repaid. Mobile teams were deployed across the country, combing through villages, small towns, and city corners. They didn't come with cameras or empty promises. They came with food, medicine, school materials, and most importantly, open ears. Ibrahim himself led by example. Once a month, without warning, he would leave the palace behind and journey into remote villages, walking dusty roads, sitting under baobab trees, listening to farmers, mothers, and children speak of their dreams and disappointments. Leadership, he realized, wasn't standing above the people. It was standing among them. During one town hall gathering, an old farmer stood up, rough hands shaking slightly, and asked a question that had been burning in many hearts. "Why are you doing all this now?" The room grew still. Ibrahim could have given 1,000 political answers about strategy, about policy, about reform timelines, but instead he spoke from a place far deeper. "Because one boy," he said, voice raw with memory, "stood alone in the dust holding his father's boots. And he reminded me that leadership isn't about power, it's about people." Those words, simple, honest, undeniable, spread like wildfire. Across radios, across markets, across every tired heart that had once stopped believing, people began calling it the March of the Boots. It wasn't about one boy anymore. It was about thousands of families finally being seen, finally being heard, finally being honored for the sacrifices etched into the soil of their homeland. Boots became the symbol of a movement. Old boots, patched boots, boots hung in market stalls or placed in front of government offices as a silent demand. Remember us. Mothers held them during protests. Veterans marched with them tied to their belts. Schools taught children not just the names of kings and presidents, but of soldiers and farmers who built the nation with their lives. The March of the Boots wasn't a parade. It was a resurrection. But as the people marched forward, lifted by new hope, darker forces stirred in the shadows, forces that had profited from silence, from stolen funds, from unseen grief. And while Ibrahim had won a battle for dignity, he knew the war for the nation's soul had only just begun. Back in the presidential office, in a room built for power, it was still the battered boots that commanded the space. They remained on Ibrahim's desk, not locked away in a display case, not polished and framed, but resting exactly as Malik had given them. Scuffed, torn, heavy with memory. A quiet witness to every decision made since that day in the dust. During cabinet meetings, while others spoke of budgets, defense strategies, trade agreements, Ibrahim's eyes would drift. Not to graphs or reports, but to the boots. He would stare at them, feeling the weight of promises made, of sacrifices unseen. They anchored him, reminded him why he sat at the head of that long polished table in the first place. Progress, he realized, wasn't measured by how many new roads were paved or towers erected. True progress was measured by how well the most invisible among them were carried forward. And far from the gleaming halls of government, another kind of progress quietly bloomed. In a small, sunlit classroom, Malik sat in the front row, his shoes polished, his uniform crisp. He listened intently, absorbing every lesson like soil drinks rain. His little sister Aicha, bright-eyed and mischievous, thrived alongside him, dreaming of futures neither of them had dared imagine months ago. But every night when Malik returned, home. After homework was finished and the lamps dimmed low, he would kneel beside his bed, gently clean the old boots, and place them carefully next to him, as if standing guard over the boy he used to be and the man he was becoming. The boots were not a burden. They were a compass. A silent vow he carried in his heart. I'll wear them when I'm big enough. Not to fight, but to serve. And across the nation, Malik's spirit was multiplied 1,000 times over. In towns and cities, in dusty fields and crowded markets, the voice of change grew louder. Families once forgotten stood tall. Children once abandoned began to dream again. Boots were placed on courthouse steps, carried through marches, worn with pride and defiance. The March of the Boots wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, one step at a time. Leadership, Ibrahim realized more deeply than ever, had never been about titles or medals or how loud you could command a room. Real leadership was quieter, heavier. It lived in the dust collected on boots, worn by those who chose service over self. And for the first time in a long time, the people were beginning to believe again, not in promises, but in themselves. But where hope rises, resistance often follows. Not everyone wanted the change. Not everyone welcomed the shaking of old systems. In the shadowed corridors of government buildings, in private rooms behind locked doors, whispers turned to plans. Power brokers, corrupt officials, and those who had thrived in the old world gathered, plotting how to stop the march before it tore away everything they had stolen. The battle for the heart of the nation, the real battle, was only just beginning. Stay tuned for Part 2, The Betrayal Within. Coming soon. If you believe leadership is about people, not power, make sure you subscribe, share, and comment below. Together, let's keep marching.